Welcome back to another installment of Decatur Dish, where we're dishing out the latest happenings and stories making headlines in DeKalb County. As you can see, one of us at least is festive this episode, and for a very special reason. We are recapping the highlights of 2023 out of DeKalb County. We got memorable moments that made history, some frightening moments for the community, some happy moments, some inspiring moments. So many stories that you've told, Dan, over the past year, so many that we have told here at Atlanta News First. So without further ado, joined here by editor and founder of Decaturish, Dan Wisenhunt. Here are our top ones from 2023, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, meowy Christmas to you as well. Yes, so that we got a list of our biggest stories. I kind of matched up the stories that had the most page views with the stories that had the most impact. In most cases, this probably will not be a mystery to most of you if you've been reading the site for a long time, but I say let's get into it. You ready?
I'm ready. First up, Clarkston. What was going on this year with Clarkston?
What was going on with Clarkston? That was sort of the question of the year. So they had a city manager named Shawana Cowie who was hired a couple of years ago. She was interim and then she was made permanent. And in the course of the last year, we started to see people leaving the Clarkston Police Department. And it boiled down to a conflict that the police chief had with the city manager. A bunch of employees were leaving. The police chief was suspended for 3 days, under rather mysterious circumstances. And that's when we got wind of it, because when the police chief takes an unplanned 3-day vacation, it's not going to stay a secret for very long. That resulted in an EEOC complaint. The police chief accused the city manager of having racial animus towards white people. More officers left. Somewhere along the way, some contracts were issued that didn't go before the council first, which is not really how that's supposed to work. She hired a fellow by the name of John Pearson to be the director of police services. So to kind of put this in perspective, the police chief filed an EEOC complaint, and then she was effectively demoted, although they said she wasn't demoted except she had a boss, so how is that not a demotion? And they gave John Pearson, the new director of police services, a badge and a gun even before he was sworn in. And so the police chief went back and said, hey, you can't actually have this badge and gun and car unless you're sworn in. You need to give that back. And then they swore the chief, the director of police services, in that day. Long story short, this person apparently didn't get paid anything, won't get paid anything, more likely than not because his hiring wasn't done the way it's supposed to be done under the city charter. There were contracts that were let for public relations services that were not done the correct way, other services as well. Those contracts had to be rescinded in some cases by the council. It won't surprise anyone here that the city manager got herself resigned. They parted ways. She took a severance. They appointed an interim city manager, and then the council had to go back in and rescind the contracts and pay out settlements. And that's what happened to Clarkston. That's a lot. A lot happened in Clarkston in 1 year. Sometimes the smallest communities that we cover have drama that is disproportionate to the size of the community. And I think what we learned in Clarkston is sometimes people get a little too hung up on winning and not paying attention to what's happening that could be the best for everyone, not minding the best interests of everyone. And I think I think a lot of people had their concept of winning or losing wrapped up in who the city manager was. And I think it delayed them from making a decision long after it had become, I forgot to mention, the city manager's own brother showed up at a public meeting. I'm not making this stuff up, y'all. The city manager's own brother showed up at this thing and started making these really kind of off the wall remarks about, the racial purity of the police chief. And it was it was strange. Like, I've never had a relative show up to intervene in any job dispute I have. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that as well, not experienced that as well. So it's almost impossible to quantify how crazy the year was in Clarkston. But they've got an interim city manager. They just had elections. They've got one new council member. So Clarkston's got a lot of work to do in 2024.
And that leads me to a question for you. In 2024, do you think they are in a better position now or set to have a calmer year at least?
I think that's really going to depend on whether the people on that council realize that there's an interest that surpasses their own narrow interests. I think small-minded people create small-minded government. And if you're worried about winning or losing specific turf battles, you're going to miss the opportunities that are right in front of you. So one would hope that Clarkston would take some lessons out of what happened and try to run a better government going forward. But if they don't, I mean, keeps us busy, right?
We'll be there to cover it all for you.
That's right. It keeps us busy. So I guess I shouldn't complain, but it's really going to depend on if they took the correct lessons from what happened to them this year.
And, you know, speaking of an area that's gone through a lot of change, DeKalb County School District is one of them. And that was another one of our year in reviews that we really wanted to talk about here. I mean, the superintendent change seems to be never ending. Yeah,
well, they change superintendents about as often as I change socks. I mean, that's really DeKalb's way. So they got... A year or so ago, Cheryl Watson Harris was unceremoniously fired. We don't know all the reasons that happened. They brought in an insider named Dr. Vasane Tinsley. Dr. Tinsley was the interim for a while, and then they did a search. They were committed to doing a search. And it came down to Dr. Tinsley and the person they ultimately hired, which was Devin Horton. Now, in the mix, we have a school board member named Dr. Joyce Morley. I would think most people who have seen any stories about the DeKalb County School Board recently have probably seen that name, have probably seen her. Reporters love Dr. Morley. She's always great for a quote, great for a soundbite. I don't know that her colleagues feel the same way. Dr. Morley likes to pontificate about a lot of different things that bother her. Sometimes those things are very important and need to be talked about, and sometimes you're just asking yourself, well, what are we doing here? So she was a big proponent of hiring Dr. Tinsley, and when it became obvious that the board was probably going to go in a different direction, Dr. Morley called the local newspaper, the AJC, and said, you're not going to believe what they're talking about in executive session. Now, for those of you who don't know, an executive session is a closed-door meeting of a government body. It's legally allowed to be closed to the public as long as it meets certain conditions, one of which is a personnel search, which this clearly was. But Dr. Morley violated the confidences of that executive session, called the paper, said that the board was divided and that Dr. Horton wasn't the preferred candidate, wasn't the best candidate, and Dr. Tinsley was. The problem with her doing that, aside from the fact that she violated the board's ethics code, which the board ultimately concluded as well and voted to disavow what she had done, is that kind of put the board in a corner. Because if they hadn't hired Dr. Horton, he could have easily turned around and litigated with the school board, saying that Dr. Morley had unfairly undercut him by violating the confidences of the executive session. So Dr. Morley, in her passion for wanting to put her candidate in place, inadvertently put the school district in a sort of untenable legal position when it came to hiring. So it was almost as if, even if they wanted to go in another direction, it probably would not have been a good idea if they had done so under the circumstances. So the board took the unprecedented step of finding a board member. Dr. Morley had violated their own ethics code. That's where they voted to disavow. If you read the ethics code, it's not like there's a whole lot of teeth in it. It's all symbolic, but they did finally push back and say, this isn't acceptable conduct for a board member. Dr. Horton got hired. He's making about $300,000 a year, and that's where that stands as of right now. He's the superintendent. Dr. Morley continues to be the one no vote on most of the issues. She's not getting along with the school board right now. That's probably the way it's going to be for the foreseeable future.
Another popular topic around DeKalb County is none other than Baby Kroger. A little throwback to our Decatur Dish episode 2, I believe. You got rather passionate about Baby Kroger. You have some thoughts on this.
I do have I have thoughts on Baby Kroger, also called the Communist Kroger. It's got a lot of different nicknames. Baby Kroger closed in December 2022. It was part of a closure of several local stores by corporate, but they still had a 2-year lease left on it. So it's been sitting there empty and boarded up for a little while. But now, a year later, it looks like Pope and Land is going to come in and develop it into a mixed-use project. Looks like they're going to start that in 2025. But if you recall in the last episode, we talked about efforts to do retail recruitment in Decatur. The DDA signed a contract. They're going to try to bring another grocery store in, supposedly with this new mixed-use redevelopment of the Baby Kroger. There is going to be a grocery store component, and everybody in Decatur wants a Trader Joe's. And the first person that brings a Trader Joe's you should have seen the comments online. They put a Trader Joe's, they put like another one in Midtown, and people in Decatur just went apoplectic because they already have a Trader Joe's. Why can't we get a Trader Joe's? It is just the death blow to the ego of Decatur that there's not a Trader Joe's in DeKalb County. And I do believe that the first person who gets a Trader Joe's in DeKalb County, they're going to build a statue of that person. This is the day. This is the day Decatur realized its full potential and got a Trader Joe's. And what they don't realize is that Aldi is like Trader Joe's, but without the Hawaiian shirts. It's the same thing. They've got $2 wine that has a lot of sulfides in it that'll give you a really bad headache. They've got cheap other stuff. They have an egg section that looks like it's had a bull just run through it and there are eggs cracked everywhere. I mean, it's the same store, but people they want that hipness with the Trader Joe's. So maybe it'll be a Trader Joe's, maybe it won't be, maybe it'll be a Lidl, who knows. But that's what is the plan going forward, is to turn it into another mixed use. People in Decatur aren't always crazy about having mixed use projects, but that's apparently what makes the money, so that's what they're going to do with that. So
I will say DeKalb County is such a unique community to follow. It's ever growing. It's very united, and I feel like if any community is going to speak a Trader Joe's into existence, it's going to be DeKalb County.
I mean, they've been trying for 10 years, God bless them. They really have. Or another Costco would also be fine. They would like that as well. So no disrespect to Brookhaven, but a lot of us aren't feeling a 30-minute drive to Brookhaven to go to Costco. So, we could just get that in our vicinity as well. That would be great. But yeah, DeKalb County Trader Joe's, folks, if you're listening, you could be somebody's hero today, right now, just by signing the lease. I'm just telling you.
Hey, speaking of development coming, or ongoing, I should say, let's talk a little bit about North DeKalb Mall. A lot of changes over there as well, redevelopment getting underway, and a massive tax break.
Yeah, North DeKalb Mall has been in a bad way for years. It's kind of our resident zombie mall. They film movies there. I assume they filmed a zombie movie there at some point. They film a lot of other films there. They've got the $5 movie theater, where you can go to the AMC cinemas there and, get a cheap matinee. It's got a lot of things going for it, but it's also a business model and type that really doesn't work anymore. So Edens is the developer of that. They bought the project. They're going to knock most of it down. The movie theater is staying, y'all. So don't worry. Your cheap movies they might not be cheap when they're done with it, but the movies will still be there. They're going to put, about 2,000 housing units, give or take, in there. There's going to be some pedestrian connectivity. And to help them pay for it, they're getting $70 million, I believe, in tax reimbursements. And that was just approved. We should start seeing demolition happen there pretty soon. If you want to know what this might look like, obviously this is a lot smaller, but the Toco Hills development, where it's got Spiller Park and I believe Goldberg's, there's a couple of really neat local chains that are there. I think and Edens has done that development as well. So I think you'll get a sense, if you've shopped there before, of the kind of tenant mix that we could see coming into the North DeKalb Mall project.
In March, we reported that someone bombed an ATM machine at a bank in DeKalb County near the North DeKalb Mall. In April, police arrested Abdurrahim Jalal in connection to that ATM explosion and found 8 more pipe bombs in his Decatur home. Then in June, our partners at Decaturish captured photos of Duluth police, a different agency, searching Jalal's home while he remained in jail. When Decaturish asked Duluth police for information and documents about why they were searching Jalal's home on Scott Boulevard, police responded with a report about human remains found at a property on Abbott's Bridge Road. The report says a lawyer representing an anonymous client called the Gwinnett County District Attorney's Office to report that his client had possibly found human remains on his father's property while cleaning out the location. Tonight we went to that address. It's an auto shop but was closed when we arrived. We called and left a message for the owner to ask about the human remains. Duluth police also released this sketch of a young woman tonight and confirmed to Decaturish her remains were the ones found at the location on Abbott's Bridge Road at the beginning of June. Investigators estimate she's between 5 to 5.5 feet tall and was in her mid-20s to early 30s. Tonight, they're still trying to figure out who she is.
Part of what we wanted to do here with our year in review is really talk about the significant moments, the major moments, and one of which not as joyful but important to talk about. Earlier this year, the incident with an explosive near the mall area at an ATM specifically. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so this is an interesting story because at the time, so North DeKalb Mall is less than a mile from my house, and my bedroom actually faces the mall. And so around 3 a.m., I heard a loud explosion, and I woke up. And I thought, fireworks, maybe a transformer had blown. Apparently, somebody had blown up the ATM. This was in March. And, I didn't think much more than, oh gosh, somebody blew up the ATM. Fast forward to April, and they are raiding a person's house in Decatur. It's a rental. It's near Westchester on Scott Boulevard. And it turns out that this is the person who is accused of blowing up the ATM. This person allegedly had 8 pipe bombs in their house when they were arrested, and it was a big deal. This person was indicted in federal court and state court. I believe this person is still in federal custody. He's on the screen right now. So on top of that, a few weeks later, Duluth police came sniffing around the property because apparently they found a body on property that the suspect in the ATM bombing owned up there. We don't know what became of that, but that was by far and away the most frightening story in a lot of ways. The idea that somebody could allegedly have 8 pipe bombs in a residential area so close to a school. Apparently, this individual was able to get close to $80,000 allegedly from this theft, and all I could think was, why would a bank have $80,000 in an ATM at 3 in the morning? That's just a little strange to me, but I don't know how banks and ATMs work and how they do that sort of thing. I bet you they won't do that going forward now that that's common knowledge. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff surrounding that story. Would not be shocked if it became sort of a Decaturish novella someday, because there's a lot of interesting tidbits and details, and we will be following that one very closely in the coming year.
Let's talk about some major moments for the restaurant businesses. We said goodbye to some popular spots. The first one, the beloved Decatur Taco Mac. We must talk about that.
Yeah, so the Decatur Taco Mac was there for 22 years on West Ponce, and by all appearances was a successful business. Had corporate backing, was always full. More importantly for Decatur, it had a dedicated parking lot that wasn't paid. Which is kind of the golden path if you own a business in Decatur. The most successful businesses tend to have their own dedicated parking in some kind of way. But one day they just abruptly said, our lease is ending and we're going to close. And there wasn't much more to it than that. I was never able to get the property owner on record to talk about the how and the why. Taco Mac would never really give me a whole lot of information. They said, we've enjoyed our time here, we're going to move on. Taco Mac, incidentally, is not that far from the baby Kroger as well. But now there is a new sports bar that's supposed to be going in there called Bench Warmers. They've got a presence in Greater Decatur, and they're going to sort of fill that niche. And so we're going to see what happens. But it definitely was, if you read the reviews, there are a lot of people who didn't have the greatest experience at that restaurant, but I could not imagine how that restaurant wasn't making money, given that the parking lot was always full, and it always had dedicated, it never seemed to be short on business. Whether or not people were enjoying themselves, I don't know, but I have a hard time believing it wasn't making enough money. There's probably some other reason. These things happen all the time. There's a lot of development going on in Decatur, so who knows? Maybe that property is being considered for a larger development play down the road. We'll just have to see where that one goes. And we had another restaurant close as well.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about Revival. I feel like if you're from DeKalb, long term at least, you'll know this spot.
Yeah, so Revival was opened by Kevin Gillespie, who's a local celebrity chef. He's the fellow who did Gun Show, if you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. Opened on Church Street in 2015. By all accounts, was well liked, well received by the residents. But earlier this year they had to close. Apparently there was a burglary that happened around New Year's. They took an undisclosed, I think I reported it, but I have to go look it up. But they took a lot of cash. It was their New Year's deposits, so whatever they got from those shifts. And then there was a storm, and there was a lot of storm damage to that building. And, between the losses from the safe getting stolen and the storm damage, and really, there were some ongoing issues even before that. Kevin Gillespie and I had talked, and, he talked about how the parking situation was a challenge. So I think all these factors combined made it sort of an easy call for him to say, we're going to move on and do something else. But, definitely having a Kevin Gillespie helmed restaurant in Decatur definitely upped our coolness factor a little bit. Kevin Gillespie is one of those celebrities that's been in all kinds of different media and has a lot of exposure in other places that aren't just food related. So that was unfortunate, but that's the way it goes in Decatur. It's the way it goes everywhere. Hopefully we'll have something equally cool move into that spot.
As we talk about the businesses that we said goodbye to, it's an important reminder to support the businesses, the local businesses that are still here today. We actually have a special set of businesses around the Decatur community that we want to talk about.
Yeah, so Anila Yoganathan is a very talented reporter who came to us and gave me a pitch. And she said, I want to write a story about South Asian businesses and how they're responding to the development that's going on around them. It turned into a 4-part series called The Taste of Home. It is excellent. You can read it on Decaturish.com. And Anila joined us to talk a little bit more about it. Today we're joined by Anila Yoganathan, who is a reporter and a contributor to Decaturish.com. And Anila pitched to me a few weeks ago a story about the South Asian business community in Decatur, specifically focused on Patel Plaza and Sherian's. It's called A Taste of Home, and you can find that on Decaturish.com. Anila, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
So talk to us a little bit about your career as a journalist and what brought you to working with us at Decaturish.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm born and raised in Georgia. I grew up in DeKalb County in Tucker, and I went to the University of Georgia and studied journalism. And so since then, I've done a few different internships. I kind of specialize in in-depth stories, just long-form stories, trying to tell people, what's going on, where they're coming from. And so for the last year and a half, I was previously in Knoxville, Tennessee, doing an investigative job covering environment. I came home and I was like, I kind of want to do something about my community.
And so what is it that gave you the idea for this series? I know you and I talked on the phone, and it initially was like one gigantic story, and then I got the draft, and I was like, this could really be 3 or 4 stories. So walk me through your thought process about what prompted you to make that pitch to us and how the story came together.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of always wanted to highlight the uniqueness of the South Asian businesses and its community in Decatur, because it's grown so big in my own lifetime. And it's kind of one of those places that's super unique. You know, you go there and you just feel at home. And I don't always feel that in other spaces. And so I was like, you know, this is a great spot to kind of show people like, hey, here's this community here in Atlanta that you might not have visited, or, you know, some of these businesses, access to South Asian culture and resources that you might not know about. And also it has like a historic value here. You know, it started around in the 80s where you started seeing a couple businesses kind of pop up in the area. And then it grew to kind of these two massive plazas that have, you know, a number of businesses that are thriving. And so I kind of wanted to capture the beauty of that because you don't always see that in other places. So yeah.
And there's a specific jumping off point too, because there's a lot of development that's going on around these businesses.
Yes.
And part of the impetus, if I recall, was to talk about how these businesses are adapting to that. So what did you learn about how the businesses that you profiled in this series are adapting to the changes that are happening around them?
Yeah, so if you've been down Church Street and Scott Boulevard, you have seen the massive number of apartments that have popped up. And, you know, when you see all of that development to a certain degree, and it's close to, you know, mom and pop businesses, you kind of get a little nervous because you're like, oh, I don't know if these businesses are going to survive. Is this good for them? Is it bad for them? And then you've got North DeKalb Mall and its development just coming up nearby. So I was a little concerned. And so I started asking these business owners, like, is this good for business? How does this work? And they said, you know, this is bringing new customers to them. And especially like it's bringing more customers outside of the South Asian community, which is really great to see because you know, you kind of have more people exploring our culture, exploring our food, you know, just getting to know the area in a way that, you know, you maybe previously hadn't seen.
And the reverse is true for us because it allows us as a publication to connect with readers who might not have otherwise wanted to read us because we didn't cover their communities as well as we could have in the past because we didn't have an in, we didn't have a connection. And Nilla was able to step in and provide that for us and help build that link. One of the things that I was struck by, Anila, reading that story is how much these businesses have been community first and business maybe just behind that. And I know Zika in particular, I read something in that story where the fellow who owns it said, you know, I've had people offer me tons of money to develop something here, but I've chosen to stay put. Why do you think that mentality exists? When they could certainly get a nice payday and move somewhere that's maybe a little cheaper to do business? Why is it important to these business owners that they stay in the community?
Well, you know, if you remember growing up in Atlanta in around the 80s and 90s, you know, there were very few South Asian businesses that were kind of just popped up in a few different locations. There were a couple in North Druid Hills. There was a couple in Decatur. But, you know, you would have people driving hours just to find a grocery store, just to find a restaurant. And, you know, places like Zika are really great to highlight because they know what that means because, you know, some of those business owners themselves coming to America, they remember having to, you know, the struggle to find access to resources from home, struggle to find the food that tastes like home. So those businesses themselves, those business owners, they know what it's like firsthand, not having that access to culture and to roots in the same way as you do now. So they don't take that for granted.
What is one thing, obviously you grew up around these businesses, your family patronized these businesses, so you knew a lot about it as a customer and as a community member. What's one thing you learned that you did not know in the course of reporting the story for us?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the most rewarding parts of doing this series was getting to know the business owners and their personal stories because, you know, these are people that have been responsible for building the community to what it is today, in my opinion, and getting to know these owners and their stories from coming from India, you know, what they experienced coming here, why they chose to build here, and just those heartwarming stories of why they continue to put the community first. That's something that was so rewarding for me, because it's like I got to know the history of our community in Decatur and in the metro Atlanta area as a whole, which not a whole lot of people necessarily know about.
And Patel Plaza is due for a major renovation, which was a follow-up story you did. Tell us a little bit about that project.
Yeah, absolutely. So they try and do renovations periodically, and Patel Brothers, the company, the same family owns Patel Plaza. Their competitors are the owners of Cherry's and Grace Plaza. And so, you know, they've got kind of a friendly competition going on, which is great to see. So, you know, Patel Brothers tries to update their stores across the country. They are a national chain based out of Chicago. And if you've seen Kennesaw or Sewanee, they've got a couple new locations over there, and those locations look a little bit different from the current one in Decatur. And so they're kind of giving a whole facelift to the area and to that plaza, and just doing a whole new design, trying to make it a little bit more modern, and also make the Patel Brothers location, specifically the grocery store, a little bit more spacious. Basically, it's a little bit more crowded, and if you give more space, it means it could bring in more customers.
So to close this out, a lot of our readers, I think, have seen Patel Plaza, have seen Cherry's. They drive by, they wonder about those businesses. They want to know a little bit more about it. What should people who maybe haven't shopped at these businesses before know about these businesses?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, you know, there's a lot of variety in the foods in these businesses, as well as, you know, from vegetables to spices to, you know, different frozen foods and snacks. And if you are trying to get into the South Asian culture, just looking for spices, you can't beat these businesses, because they'll give you a good bang for your buck. So, you know, I genuinely think these are places that you should frequent if you're trying to expand more into different cuisines, and you might find some things in these stores that you can't find in others. And they don't just cater to South Asians, you know, they cater to other communities as well. So that's the great thing about it, is that it's a pretty diverse space.
Well, Anila, we appreciate your efforts on our behalf. The series is great. Google A Taste of Home, Decaturish. Read all of those stories. You won't be disappointed. They're fantastic pieces of reporting. And Anila, we're looking forward to doing more work with you in 2024.
Same. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us.
This is our big closeout for 2023, but Decatur Dish will be back January 9th here on Atlanta News First Plus. In the meantime, we are not going anywhere. We're going to continue to keep you updated on your latest DeKalb County headlines. Dan, where can people find you?
Well, go to Decaturish.com for all your local news. Go to locallysourcednews.com to sign up for our email. Go to supportyourlocalnews.com to become a subscriber. And I wanted to stop and say a quick thank you to the people who contributed to our fall fundraiser. We had to raise $25,000 by December 21st. We met that goal and exceeded it on Saturday. So a very sincere thank you from the Decaturish team, because this has been a really challenging year for us, probably more challenging than you might be able to see from where you're sitting, just reading our articles every day. So please know that money definitely means a lot to us, and it's going to help us continue to do the things that we do going forward. Another great way to support us is to go ahead and download that Atlanta News First app. You can get episodes of this show and access to all the other great content that our media partners at Atlanta News First put together. It's a great way to support them, and it's a great way to support us. So please do that if you can. And once again, thank you so much to the people who contributed to that fall fundraiser. And we will see you again in January.
2024.
Hopefully with as Alabama as the national champs. But we will find out. Roll Tide Roll.
We'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.